Using satirical power and turning it into a weapon of protest is a common thread running into the musical power of Fela Kuti. And if there is one song that embodies the denunciation of power established in Nigeria in the 70s and that spirit of rebellion, that song is called Zombie. Let's dive into this musical anecdote to understand how Fela Kuti and his song will challenge the political establishment in place in Nigeria at this time and challenge the entire army of the country. But to understand why the song Zombie actually exists, we need to understand a little bit more about the political context in Nigeria at this time. In the 70s, Nigeria was living under a very tense political context. The country was under military rules with abuse of power, repression, and institutional violences. The government in place at the time was ruled by a military coup, and citizens all around the country were feeling more and more frustrated and more oppressed as well. Fela Kuti used his musical genius combining jazz, blues, soul music, hi-fi with the traditional Yoruba rhythm to turn Afrobeat into a sharp criticism of the government in place at that time in Nigeria. In each of his songs, he was not only talking about the suffering of people in Nigeria, he was choosing to speak out about it publicly without shying away from the consequences of the action of the government on people in Nigeria. And it is in that context that in 1977, he will decide to write the song Zombie. When writing that song, it was a direct attack of the Nigerian army. He compared the soldiers as zombies that were used as machines without any sort of consciousness on their action on the population. He compares them to zombies being devoid of any thought of their own, with no sense of moral and critical sense, who not only just act based on the orders given by the government and the army, but would never question the type of orders given when those orders were against the well-being of the population in Nigeria. The song Zombie is a real cry of revolt and a fierce denunciation of the military power in place in Nigeria, as well as the corruption in the country. But this is not just a political criticism, it's a real call to the rise of collective consciousness of people in the country. Fela Kuti wants to wake up, to shake up the Nigerian community, the Nigerian population, and encourage them to rise up against oppression. That song, when being released in 1977, will become a success not only in Nigeria, but it's going to become a real anthem and a symbol all over Africa of fighting against oppression. And it's not going to go unnoticed by the government, which will not let what they consider as being a provocation go unnoticed and unchallenged. On the 18th of February 1977, it's about 1,000 soldiers who will decide to invade the property of Fela Kuti. That property is called Kalakuta Republic, and that place was not just Fela Kuti's house, it was a unique symbol of musical freedom. The government at the time, led by the General Olusegun Obasanjo, sees the song Zombie as a direct threat to its authority. The song was not only seen as an attack, but it was seen as a humiliating public attack of authority. And in response, they will decide to take action. And this action will remain in the history of music in Nigeria as one of the most violent moments in his musical history. Kalakuta Republic was not only Fela Kuti's house, it was a self-proclaimed commune by Fela Kuti himself that he founded in Lagos, Nigeria. It was obviously a place of residence because it was his house, but it was also a music studio and a center of political resistance. And the word Kalakuta is not something that he picked out of the blue. He chose that name as Kalakuta means place of chaos or place full of troubles, and he used that word as a way to symbolize the way he was seeing the Nigerian society, because it was obviously full of corruption, injustice, and violence at the time. It was obviously where Fela Kuti and his musician, as well as political activists, were all living and working together, but it was also a place where they would take political initiative, not only to debunk and denounce the unfair treatment that the population would go through, it was also a way for them to help and try to tackle poverty in Nigeria. On that day of February 1977, the soldiers initially justified their arrival with a story around illegal substances. Once they've entered the house, they've destroyed the studio, they've burned the instruments, they've beat up the members of his family, his bands, but what remained in everyone's memory was the attack against his mother, Funmilayo Ramsamy-Kuti, a women's rights activist and a symbol of fight against injustice. At over 70 years old, his mother was a vulnerable and aged woman, and the army will act without any soul. They will actually throw her out the window of the second floor of the property. Terribly weakened by the attack, his mother will remain in the coma for many months before passing away almost a year after the attack. And her death became a real symbol of the regime at the time in Nigeria. But Fela Kuti was not intimidated. Instead, he organized a series of concerts to actually denounce the attack that he went through, that his band, his activists, as well as his mother went through. He even made a more symbolic act while laying the coffin of his mother in front of the residential palace as a final defiance against the government in place. Fela Kuti's music became even more political, and his concerts a place for protest against the abuses of the regime. And the success and the messages of his song started to resonate far beyond the frontiers of Nigeria. It really made him a symbol of resistance with an extraordinary denunciation power. The song Zombie not only shocked Nigeria but attracted international attention. The song Zombie, Fela Kuti's music and Fela Kuti's genius became a real symbol of fighting against oppression, inspiring millions and millions of people, activists, singers, and artists all over the world as a symbol of fighting against authoritarian regimes all around the world. And Fela Kuti's courage, his music, and his willpower remained a source of inspiration, reminding us that even in the face of oppression, the suffering of millions of people, and the voice of people around the world, when carried out through music, can change the course of history. Fela Kuti did not only defy the Nigerian army, he defied silence. And even today, his legacy remains a real symbol of fighting against injustice and oppression.